This is E&P Reports from Editor and Publisher Magazine, the authoritative voice of news media since 1884, serving newspapers, broadcasts, digital, and all multimedia news publishing. And howdy and welcome again, Mike Blinder, publisher of E&P Magazine, as I must by contractual commitment. Housekeeping, if you are listening to this program on your favorite podcast platform, please follow us. Watching us on the YouTube channel. Below me is a subscribe button. Next to it is a bell. If you smash that thing, you'll get an update each and every time we upload a new episode of E&P Reports. I am giddy as a schoolgirl because one of my heroes, imagine a chef being able to interview Bobby Flay. I mean, imagine a struggling actor to have Francis Ford Coppola on his program. I've got Mike Barnicle on my program. Mike, I don't know if you remember when we chatted on the phone a few months ago, but I kept calling you Mr. Barnicle.
Yeah, I do.
And you kept saying, call me Mike. And I kept saying, Yes, sir, Mr. Barnicle. So you must have thought I was some kind of a flake.
Yeah, I was a bit worried there for a few.
As you should be, sir. But not only was I a New Englander for years, I was up in Portland, Maine, Press Herald. I worked for a radio group out of Boston, but I was reading you for 25 years up there. I've met you at a couple of events, but I'm so honored to have you on this program because we're going to be discussing a pretty heavy topic. As we just released, Gretchen Peck, our contributing editor, did an amazing job. She spent months on this, of a cover story put American Democracy in Crisis. The subline is, the press reframes democracy coverage to capture a perilous, critical moment in U.S. history. Before we go any farther, sir, do you agree with that subheadline? Are we at a perilous, critical moment in U.S. history?
Yeah, I think we are. And I think the peril lies largely in two things. The actual peril that certain people in politics and a certain political party largely, unfortunately, presents to American democracy. And the other aspect of it is that we are so overwhelmed with our own curiosities and our own lives and our own iPhones, and that we don't pay enough attention to the peril that is it's approaching the front door. It's about to knock on the front door of democracy and say, hey, we're here for you. And I don't think American citizens, American people, I understand it. I've got a busy life. You've got a busy life. Everybody has busy lives. But boy, this is a serious situation.
We're going to get to that topic and talk more about media and Mike Barnicle's part of it on the backside of this message.
This episode of E&P Reports is sponsored by IQ Audience Plus by Town News. Consumer revenue has never been more important. Digital leaders at media organizations worldwide are asking the same question. How do we accelerate the growth of consumer revenue? Traditional one-size-fits-all paywalls aren't the answer. They're blunt instruments that treat all visitors the same way, costing you money. IQ Audience Plus by Town News is a smart, dynamic metering solution that empowers you to maximize revenue by identifying key audiences, seeding engagement, and growing membership and subscriptions. Ready to supercharge your consumer revenue, grow engagement, and bolster your advertising income? Visit townnews.com/EP today to learn more about IQ Audience Plus by Town News.
Mike, I'd like to start off at 50,000 feet, if I may. And I want to first talk about the culture wars. There is obviously a culture war. Do you agree? But it's not a new thing. You know, we've always had culture wars in our society. And we could go back to McCarthyism, right? I mean, which was nothing more than, in my opinion, anti-Semitism. If you take, John Wayne and Hedda Harper screaming out in California in the Hollywood 10. We've gone through this in many different types and times. But I wrote an editorial at E&P 2 months or 3 months ago, and I called it, everybody should just watch one Aaron Sorkin episode of something. Are you a fan of Aaron Sorkin or not, sir?
Yes. Yeah, sure.
I think he does an amazing job of showing both sides of a political argument. And I referenced a quote, and I want to bring this out as we discuss culture wars, from a show that very few people, I think, ever saw. It was called Studio 60. It had this guy named Matthew Perry from Friends and Sarah Paulson, and he was the liberal Jewish writer. She was the religious Christian right, and they were in a relationship. And she asked him, I don't even know what sides are anymore in the culture war. And here's what he said. I want you to, this is an Aaron Sorkin line that I kind of go through my head every time I watch what's going on. He said, well, your side hates my side because we think you're stupid, and my side hates your side because we think you're stupid. Now, stop on that. I watch Morning Joe, and you are a wonderful member of a family I've been watching for years. But do you sometimes believe that we're all just chatting into echo chambers when you get on programs like that? I mean, you see where I'm going with this? Or maybe you don't.
I do. I do.
So what is your opinion, first, of at the 50,000-foot culture war level and where news is today, and especially you as a contributor to it on that program? May I ask you?
Well, I think we could talk about that one topic for 2 or 3 hours and not come to any real conclusions on either side. I think bottom line is we're a lonely nation right now. Very few of us, or a dwindling number of us, actually know our neighbors. It's not the way it was. I'm not talking like 30 or 40 years ago. No, I'm talking like 10 years ago. People were much more connected to each other than they seem to be now. And I think the culture is part of it. The culture, the accelerated pace of the culture, victimizes relationships that we used to form 10, 15 years ago. People walk around staring at their iPhones, bumping into you on city sidewalks and things like that. Kids are glued to their phones when 10, 15 years ago, those phones didn't exist really. So they lose track of all sorts of things that they would notice otherwise. I think that plays into it. But I think the largest element in terms of the culture wars and the divisions in this country, we've had them before, Mike, as you've just pointed out. They've been historical. You can go back to the 1930s, we had them. We probably go back to the Civil War and we had them.
Well, there was the biggest one. Yes, I agree.
Yeah. But this is the first time in the history, the long, colorful, sometimes tragic, often heroic history of the United States of America, that we have had a president, and now a former president, the same guy, who seemingly woke up every single day with the mission of trying to figure out how to further divide us. And I think that's taken a huge, huge toll on the culture of this country.
Well, he followed a formula. Okay, now, I mean, there's no question. I agree 100% with you. And everybody knows that I am 1,000% behind you. He followed a formula, fascism. There's no question. You can go back and look at every single aspect of what was going on in Europe in the 30s, where you take a side that is not the majority and you fan the flames and say they're the one that is responsible for this, and you flame up their anger. But what we're doing in media today to stop that doesn't seem right to me. Maybe I'm too Pollyanna, Mike, but a Madisonian pluralistic society requires both sides to get along. Don't you agree?
I do.
And we're not. I mean, you guys, I mean, I love Morning Joe, and they're like my family. John Meacham, every time he comes on and does one of his sharp jokes, when he was asked, he said, someone said, well, how do you keep in contact with the regular electorate? You as this, ethereal liberal. He says, oh, whenever I ask for my 9-iron, I learn a little bit more about culture. He's like, you guys can sometimes be condescending to the other side when Joe says things like, and please, I love him dearly and I love the show. He says, put down your sharp implements and turn on your Google machine. If the other side sees snippets of that, are we not feeding those flames like the other side feeds, and we're just keep talking to both sides? Would it not be better if Brian Kilmeade were to come on that show someday and actually open up, and Joe were to go on Fox and Friends and open? You see where I'm going with this, or is that?
I do. There's a couple of elements to that, and you're obviously onto it. One, people don't like us. Large numbers of people don't like the media. They regard us as elitist, as isolated from their reality. And our problem in the media is, especially with the coverage of what the former president of the United States has built, is we tend to lump everyone who ever voted for Donald Trump, everyone who has anything, well, I don't like him, but he did do this, who says things like that. into a box. And they're not all the same. And our problem is we really need to look much longer and much more in a much more sophisticated way at why people voted for Trump and why they are seemingly so loyal to Trump still after everything that he has said and done. And for instance, you mentioned Brian Kilmeade or other members of the media. I don't want to single him out, but the idea that too many people in elected office in the Senate and the House of Representatives refuse to concede the fact that Joe Biden won the presidency and is the legitimately elected president of the United States is not only astounding, but it is so dangerous in terms of what it does to people who don't pay a lot of attention to politics, but walk around and think, oh, yeah, I agree with them. It was fixed. That election was fixed. It's preposterous. It's provably preposterous. It's been legally proven in court after court that it's not only wrong, but totally preposterous. And yet you still have a substantial number of people, followers, political followers of Trump, who say, yeah, well, there was something wrong with that election. There was nothing wrong with that election. But we've got to find out the reasons, I think there are multiple reasons, why that has stuck in so many places to so many people.
So, but in a way, if there was no Rupert Murdoch Fox News, and it's hard to see where the Wall Street Journal leans sometimes, because sometimes it's leaning more logical, and then sometimes it goes back to conspiracy. I mean, that's at least in my 2 cents, and you may disagree with me. Aren't they giving everyone cover? I mean, if God forbid if we had laws back into place that two sides of every political argument must be presented in the press. Remember, wasn't it Cheney who removed that from our Constitution, or at least he basically allowed right-wing radio to start. Is the problem in that alone, that we just got to get back to having balanced Walter Cronkite type news? I mean,
well, to simplify it, I think the problem is that not enough people, and God bless them, there's a lot of really smart young people now in the business of newspapering and of the media in general, both print and electronic. We don't spend enough time with people because of I think, it's wonderful that we have online products now, a breaking story that breaks at 11 o'clock. You can read about it online at 12:30. But what that does is it eliminates when I was doing a column 3, 4, 5 times a week, one of the things that I was able to do is I'd go out and report on the column, find out, look someone in the eye, climb the tenement stairs, knock on the door, find out what happened and everything like that, take notes, and get back in the car and driving back to the Boston Globe, pull over, get a cup of coffee, and you'd have time. Your deadline wasn't until really 8 o'clock at night. You could wait till 8 o'clock at night to punch the send button. You could sit there and do something that I don't think people in the business today are afforded enough time to do, to think about what you're going to write, to think about what you just saw, to think about the expression of the people's faces you were talking to, whether it was a tragedy or a triumph, to what color eyes did they have, things like that, little things, anecdotal things that you would tell their story, but you'd have time to think about it. Now you get back to the paper or whatever institution you're working for. Hey, can we get something right away for the online edition? And so bang, you belt it out, and it's probably terrific, but you don't have that element of taking that extra hour or so to think, how does this fit into the long story of America, or the long story of your city that you're writing about, or the long story about the city block that you're writing about?
Well, I think it's a problem. I'm going to give you some bad news. I mean, because I'm 65. I was brought up in suburban Philly, upper middle class Jewish household. Reverend Al would call me a latte liberal, I guess, but we used to get the bulletin on Sunday, and you couldn't shop. We would read the paper all day. I mean,
sure.
The recent research of the next generation coming up, whether it's a millennial or a Gen Z, is if you don't get them in 2 minutes, they're gone.
Yeah.
The idea of in-depth reporting may not exist. See, maybe you've nailed it in a way, that the problem is everything is so quick. that
Yeah.
no one's getting any background. They're just, remember that old expression, if it bleeds, it leads? Maybe that's
Yeah.
where we are now. It's kind of scary, isn't it?
It's scary and it's sad too, because there's some tremendous writing in so many great newspapers. And there's some tremendous work being done every day by some extremely talented reporters and writers. And it's really an enormous bonus for a business that's, I don't have to tell you, that's kind of shaky compared to what it was 10, 15 years ago,
Oh, of course,
in terms of the economics of it. But I don't want to mitigate the talent that's out there, or the product that you read, that we all read. But there's that element of, giving them enough space and time to think about what they're doing in context of everything else around us.
I think the moment where my heart sank, sir, is when I first saw would you call him the previous guy?
Yeah, the former guy.
The former guy, when he first said the media is the enemy of the people. Because, I've spent, 30 years, 35 years of my life in a consulting role or a management role of news media, now managing, an editor and publisher. But now I don't know if you're familiar with some of the reporting we're doing, that it's now become very common, even on a local level or state level, to stonewall the press. The press is not could that be another thing that we have?
Sure, it is. Sure, it is.
Didn't
you knock on a door today? I know you go into a store today. You go to a police station today, looking for a story or to follow up on a story, and you're inevitably, someone's going to make, fake news. You're fake news. I mean, that label stuck. It's there. I don't know how long it's going to be there, but it's there, and it's been there for 3 or 4 years. I think it's very difficult for the media to get into the business. We can get into the business, and ought to get into it a little more than we are, of trying to measure the damage that's already been done just in the past 6 years, the damage that's been done to the institutions of government and the institutions that are the underpinning of our democracy, because of what the former guy and others have done to credibility, to credibility of the news operations in this country. They've done it. They've done some real damage.
Well, we live in a Madisonian democracy. I'm not trying to sound like Meacham. And where some very imperfect men wrote a perfect document where they gave the press that final check on power. You must agree. And now we know that when you take away their credibility, the press's ability to be part of that, we now go into fascism, right? We go into a different society. How is it possible that we could have political leaders that now applaud the idea of news deserts, that say it's okay not to have a press, it's okay to have no one checking power? In my opinion, maybe you disagree or maybe you do agree, that's where we got to start and build back up? Yes, no?
Well, I think we have to start by voting. More people have to vote, and think about who they're voting for or who they're voting against. I mean, there are some preposterous people on the ballot in various states. Starting in primaries already held, and primaries to be held in early September, and the fall elections. Again, it gets back to, we all have busy lives, and they're made busier by all the tools, these miraculous tools that we've been given over the last 10 or 15 years. The cell phones, online, Google, and everything like that, instant answers for everything. And you need instant answers because you got to go quickly to the next topic that's bothering you. But still, there remains, the long line at the grocery store. People wait to pay for their groceries and everything like that. And you can talk to them. I'm not talking specifically about going into grocery stores, but people, when they pause to talk about what's going on in the country, if that's what you're talking to them about, they have pretty solid, pretty common sense answers. And they are aware. It's not like taking a poll, who's up, who's down, what's the president's popularity rating, do you still like Trump, stuff like that. They know that something is amiss in this country. They might not be able to put their finger on it or state specifically it's because of a Supreme Court decision on abortion or because of the student loan stuff, but they know. People have a sense of the country is either in great shape and moving forward the way they want it to move forward, or there's just something amiss here. There's something wrong. There's something scary. They sense it. They sense it. That's what we have to write about. That's what we have to cover, because I think it's a huge, huge story that's largely not covered enough.
All right. So, and there's now data to back that up. The number one, there's been recent, with the ABC poll, I believe it said that the number one concern now is democracy. That's why we changed the cover story. We're on top of this. But okay, so let's take this down now. We've been at 40,000 feet. We discussed culture wars. We only have about 10 minutes left in our journey. You are now Mike Barnicle. Someone threw you any dollar amount you want. You're now managing a legacy brand newspaper in a major city. Okay. I don't know if you want that gig, but I'm giving it to you. Okay. Don't worry about the economics. You got your newsroom. You're now running a news operation in a major market city, and your focus is local now. Okay. Where would you steer them? Is that the first thing you would say? We're starting a democracy team. Is that the first thing you would do? And where would your brain be as the executive editor of this entity on a local level, sir?
Well, if I were doing that, I would start a customer team. And I would tell the young reporters and writers working for that paper that the people who buy the paper every day and read you, or read the editorials, read whatever, the sports pages of our paper, they are customers. And what I want you to do is go out and locate. You can find it easily through election records, election results, election returns. Find a couple of neighborhoods where the former guy is still very popular and people think he's getting screwed by the Justice Department, and go and find, a neighborhood where nearly everyone on the block went to an Ivy League school or the Harvard Business School, and find out what they're thinking about the former guy or the prospects in the future of America in both places, both neighborhoods, and spend a solid 5 or 6 weeks there. And if you come across anything that's eye-popping, certainly write it. We'll put it in the paper the next day. But I want you to come back in a month or 5 weeks with a solid report on why those customers that you're talking to think what they're thinking, and talk to them on an extended basis, not just to knock on the door and never see you again. Live with them with their jobs, with what they buy at the grocery store, with the cars they drive, with the hopes for their children, and do the same thing with the elitists, who went to the Ivy League school. And I think what you'd find out is, first of all, bottom line, like the hopes for their children, they would both share the same hopes. They'd both share the same hopes. In terms of politics, they might be closer on some issues than a lot of people think. You just want to find out who they are, because guess what? They happen to be our neighbors. They're not foreigners. They're not strangers. They're not new to this country, although some of them might be. Who are they? And why do they think what they think? And hey, when do those lines cross that they're closer than they think they are? Let's find out about them.
Wow. Because I maybe again, I gotta say this. I think you're channeling a young Mike Barnicle because that's what you were to me when I read you in the Herald and the Daily News and the Globe for 25 years. You were channeling people. I mean, maybe you disagree with me, but I'm not trying to blow you smoke. You're already achieved your fame. You were even in a movie with Robert Redford. What do you want me to say? But that was you, was it not? What you just said, that was how you wrote your columns. It was about.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, this was before www.com ever arrived.
Yeah.
This was when the telephone was your link to the outside world. And the most important people at the Boston Globe, to me, were the telephone operators, Rose and Barbara McDonough, sisters.
You remember their names.
Every day, I would drop into the paper, drop into the newsroom about 10:30 or 11 o'clock, only to pick up my phone messages. And that some days there'd be 60, 70 phone messages. There would always be something in there, in those phone messages, a story involving an actual human being. And that's what I used to like to do. Go find that person who called, talk to them face to face. So you get body language and everything like that. go back and by 8 o'clock, push the send button on something that happened, and the word would appear in the paper the next day, yesterday. This happened yesterday. Make it that current, make it that living, make it that real, because it was a real person who something had happened to, something happy, something sad, whatever it was. I wanted an immediacy for the reader. And I never, ever wanted a reader to come away from anything that I ever wrote saying, geez, well, what did he mean? It was pretty basic, simple, plain language. A lot of it spoken by the person who you were interviewing.
Well, that's what made it great, because people read it. I read it, and it would shape our lives by telling the story. So journalism really is storytelling, not headline.
That's it.
And I agree with before. If the reporter, there's no such thing as unbiased journalism. I mean, we're not robots, right? We're not.
No.
I mean, we all have the DNA that was formed within us from the cultures we were brought up in, but we can be impartial in that reporting, can we not? We can see both sides of it.
Sure. Yes. Yeah.
All right. So I used
to tell some editors at the Globe, yeah, I know there are two sides to every story, but guess what? Sometimes there are three.
Or four.
Yeah.
I agree. All right, so let's discuss one of the things I love about your network. I mean, you contribute to many different media, but you're a fixture on MSNBC, and I kind of miss this with Rachel. You used to? May I give a suggestion to the Morning Joe show, because I've been watching ever since I missed. You know what I mean? I've been a fan, and could you put more newspapers back on the table? You used to have them scattered about. You remember those days? I mean,
sure.
You still mention the headlines, but now the paper's gone. That doesn't mean a newspaper's a paper. I mean, that I live here in Tampa Bay. We have the Tampa Bay Times, owned by the Poynter Institute. It only publishes print twice a week. It's still a Pulitzer Prize winning incredible entity. I'm not saying paper versus digital, but these brands are under siege. You just mentioned it. You didn't get into the companies and the hedge funds, but the story we're battling now.
Yeah.
Where we're no longer a family-owned entity trying to support a community. We're a business. Are these brands, can they be saved, in your humble opinion? I know you want them saved because you're like me, you're an old guy that misses the days of yesteryear. How tarnished are they in your world, in your opinion? And can they be polished up again so they can go on for another century?
It's funny, Mike. I think a lot of the products, a lot of the papers that we're talking about, and I assume we're probably talking about the same papers, same communities. The product is really terrific. It's smaller, it's been shrunken, but it's a terrific product. Well written, well reported, most of them. But they are confronted by the dilemma of the economy around us. Look take the Globe, for example. I was instrumental, I think, in helping to make John Henry come around to the conclusion he owns the Red Sox, to buy the Boston Globe. And he bought the Boston Globe.
Wow, there's another story right there. Wow, okay.
And more or less saved that paper.
Yeah.
And it's a better paper today than it's a very good paper today.
It's an excellent paper, and it's expanding. We just did a story about how they're moving into Rhode Island.
Yes.
And starting bureaus there and the Cape. Yes.
Yeah. So papers like that, with wealthy owners, they're going to be okay to a certain extent. But when I say to a certain extent, home delivery, as you know, is almost now a prohibitive cost.
Oh, yeah.
For a lot of papers. It's one of the most expensive elements of putting the paper out. So I hesitate to say this, but I think it's going to happen within the next 3 to 4 to 5 years, that you might see papers like the Globe or other papers of similar size and regional papers shrink their printed product, and maybe down to you'd have a printed product 3 or 4 days a week. You might have a weekender that's published on Friday. You might have a big Sunday paper, and you might have a Monday paper with all the sports scores in it. But the rest of the time, you'd be reading an online product. I fear that the economics of the newspaper business might drive a lot of papers towards something like that.
I even think there's more hope coming. I'm sure you're aware of this, and this is what we chatted about when we spoke privately, that not enough attention, in my opinion, is being given now to the necessary legislation to support journalism from big tech. I mean, I remember I started as a disc jockey, like you might not know. I got a degree from GW in marine biology, and I was a DJ at Weem. I have a feeling that Mika listened to me on the Weem team back in the 70s when I was a DJ in Washington. But I remember that when we used to jock, we have to write down once every year on a form every song we ever played, so ASCAP and BMI could compensate the composer. Do you understand?
Yeah, residuals, yeah.
But I actually thought that's where it started. I learned later it started with piano rolls. Did you know that? When Player Piano started, the piano roll company started exploiting music. Back then, music distribution was sheet music. And the piano roll company started going, we're doing this for free. We're exploiting you. We're making you sell more sheet music. And they said, no, we want to be compensated. And sure enough, that same law exists today. But no, when you wrote a story and still write a story for a journalistic entity and it gets clicked on by Google or Facebook, the publisher's not compensated.
No.
That legislation is going through Congress now, and believe it or not, it is bipartisan. I believe there may be hope because that could help finance those local newsrooms. But here's the
it would.
But here's the question I'm going to ask you. This isn't a gotcha because no one can answer this question. We are supposed to be an unfettered press. In Australia, they put through this legislation. Google and Facebook are paying up. But in Australia, it's easier because they can define journalism through law. You follow my logic? We can't do that here. We can't have government say, you're a journalist and you're a blogger in your pajamas with cats on your lap. You follow my... We have to be unfettered. How would you define journalism that should survive over fake news? I hate that term, or just the bots and other things that are out there. Have you ever thought that through? And what is your definition of a pure journalistic entity in our society, sir?
The entity itself? I mean,
or the content itself. How do we police ourselves? What is that final, how should I say, sourced content that we could all rely on? Have you ever thought that through, sir?
I haven't, but I think the success of the product itself, whether it's print or electronic, relies on the undervalued element of trust. The reader, the viewer, has to trust that what they're reading and what they're seeing is accurate, is real, is honest. And I think as long as we keep doing that, and I think largely we do that very well, the longer we keep doing that, the product, no matter the economic perils that it's under right now, they'll continue, but hopefully improve as we go down the road. But as long as we continue to buttress that element of trust between us, what we do for a living, and the people who keep us in business, again, the customer, we're going to be okay.
Mike Barnicle, obviously award-winning columnist, journalist, regular on MSNBC's Morning Joe, who's written over 4,000 newspaper columns. You continue to write for the Baily Beast, Time, Huffington Post, Politico, Esquire, and many others. It has been our honor, sir. See, I'll call you Mr. Barnicle one more time, to be part of our world here at ENP. I hope you're getting our magazine and staying in touch with us. And by all means, keep up the good fight, sir. We really appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike. Glad to be here.